Hi everyone, this is Karthik Kolachila from the New Mexico State University. Today I will be presenting our paper SOK Money Laundering in Cryptocurrencies. This is a joint work with my colleagues Ajam and Mohammed and my advisor Dr. Rupa Vishwanathan. So first of what is money laundering? Money laundering is defined as a process in which you make the money which is the result of some illicit or illegitimate proceeding appear like a legal one. So a typical money laundering scheme in general follows three phases. The first phase is called as the placement phase, in which the dirty money enters into the system. The second phase is the layering phase, in which the dirty money is moved between various bank accounts, both onshore and offshore, with the intent of removing the illicit origins or the illicit proceedings. The third phase is called as the integration phase, wherein this money, which is made to appear as legalized, is used to purchase luxury goods and services. So why is this SOK important? Because over the course of last year in 2020, criminals have laundered over $1.3 billion using cryptocurrencies. And this accounts to more than 4% of the total money that was laundered last year. Like, why is this happening? Because the anti-money laundering guidelines, which are basically put forward to keep the cryptocurrency market in check, have certain loopholes which are being exploited by the criminals. In this work, we analyze those loopholes from the perspectives of blacklisting, payment networks, virtual channels. We have also identified some drawbacks and some loopholes with respect to enforcing the standard AML guidelines. And we also have an experiment section to demonstrate our findings. So there are many ways to prevent money laundering in cryptocurrencies and fiat currencies, but blacklisting is the most widely used one. So blacklisting is defined as the process of identifying certain individuals or organizations who have a proven track record of being involved in some illicit or nefarious activity. The information identifying those individuals is put on a list called as blacklist, and it is maintained by several regulatory organizations such as the US Department of Treasury. The normal people and the common citizens are barred from either interacting with or trading with those blacklisting and blacklisted entities. So there are many policies to enforce blacklisting in the cryptocurrency market, such as poison policy, haircut policy, output-based policy, FIFO, seniority, etc. But poison and haircut are the most widely used ones. So this is how the blacklisting poison policy works. Let's say you have a malicious user Alice. So in this case, Alice is the malicious user. She tries to put in 50 malicious bitcoins as an input to a transaction TX1. Poison policy works by tainting out all the transactions in which these 50 bitcoins were involved. So by tainting as in blacklisting. So when these 50 bitcoins are put as an input to a transaction TX1, that results in two additional transactions. One is a 30 bitcoin payment to Bob, and then the other one is the 20 bitcoin payment, which is an input to a transaction TX2. So both of these 20 BTC and 30 BTC transactions are tainted. And as a result of that, all the subsequent transactions will end up getting tainted as well. So this is how the effect of blacklisting gets propagated all through the network. Now, the haircut policy is a bit less drastic in comparison to poison. It works out by tainting out only the funds that were involved in nefarious or illicit activities. So, if you consider the same UTXO example as the previous one, Alice being the malicious user puts in 50 BTC as an input to a transaction TX1. Out of that, 20 BTC is illegal, whereas the 30 BTC that is basically given to Bob as a direct payment is legal. So, as a result of that, Bob's funds are not tainted, and all the transactions originating from this 30 bitcoins are legalized. On the other hand, all the transactions which originate from these 20 bitcoins are completely tainted. Now, while blacklisting looks as a promising tool to prevent money laundering, we do have certain challenges with respect to enforcing this blacklisting mechanism in cryptocurrencies. We have identified a total of 9 challenges in the paper. I'll be describing 4 of them in this talk. The first one is called as future blacklisting, where you have a malicious user Alice and an honest user Bob. So Alice sends in 100 bitcoins to Bob in exchange for some item, and in the future, at some point, Alice's money laundering offenses come to light, and then all of her funds get blacklisted. Now, since Bob was involved in a transaction with Alice, if you apply poison policy in this case, all of Bob's funds end up getting blacklisted as well. So when Bob sends in 100 bitcoins to Charlie in the future at some point to buy some item, Charlie simply responds back by saying that Bob's funds are no longer valid. Now, even though Bob is an honest user, he's basically at the receiving end in this case because of this future blacklisting issue. The second thing is the regulatory agency going rogue. Now, we all know that these blacklists are maintained by regulatory organizations, which are in turn managed by people, and people can turn malicious at any point. So, let's say you have Alice who basically sends 10 bitcoins to a malicious law enforcer and asks to blacklist a certain honest user, Bob. Now, Bob is unaware of this, and then when Bob sends in 100 BTC to Charlie in exchange for some item, Charlie simply responds back by saying that Bob has been blacklisted. Now, even though Bob has not committed any money laundering offense, he is blacklisted because of the illicit collusion between the malicious party Alice and the malicious law enforcement. The third challenge is the cooperation issue. Let's say you have a country A in which Alice is blacklisted, and then you have Bob, who is a resident of country A. Now, let's say you have country B, which does not have country A's blacklist. So Alice is a blacklisted entity in country A. Charlie is a resident of country B who doesn't know that Alice is blacklisted. So Alice sends in 100 BTC to Charlie in exchange for some item. Charlie completes the transaction. And then when Charlie sends in 100 BTC to Bob, Bob knows that Charlie was involved in a transaction with Alice, and Bob also knows that Alice has been blacklisted in his country. So as a result of that, Bob would not be accepting any payments from Charlie because these coins are coming from a blacklisted address. Now, the final challenge that I would be talking about here is the cold wallet issue. There is one fundamental problem with the cold wallets. The law enforcement agencies cannot track cold wallet transactions to the individual users. They can simply track down those cold wallets to the exchanges that maintain them. Now, let's say you have a malicious user, Alice, who is in contact with the cold wallet exchange, and then who maintains a cold wallet on her behalf. Alice sends in 100 bitcoins to Charlie, which are illicit. Charlie sends back the item. And then when Charlie figures out that Alice was involved in some sort of money laundering scam or issue, he reports it to the law enforcer. The law enforcer responds back by saying that these funds are coming from a cold wallet. So he can basically track down the cold wallet exchange. But he cannot track down the individual user, Alice. So it is up to the cold wallet exchange to conduct customer due diligence measures to prevent this from happening. Now, there are examples in which these cold wallet exchanges have facilitated money laundering. The details of this can be found in our full paper. Now, coming to payment networks and money laundering. Now, let's say you have a payment network of this type. So you have a malicious user, Alice, Bob, Charlie, Dave, Trent, and Jack being the honest users in this case. Now, let's say Alice intends to transfer $200 to Charlie. Now, there is no direct path between Alice and Charlie. So she does so by splitting up the amount into two parts, 100 USD each, and sends it to Bob and Trent, who in turn transfer it to Charlie. So Alice is an illicit user. So these $200 are basically funds which are from an illicit source. So in the future, when Alice gets caught, all of Alice's funds are blacklisted. And similarly, since Bob, Trent, and Charlie were involved in transactions with Alice, all of their funds end up getting blacklisted as well. Now, what is the issue with respect to enforcing these AML guidelines in this case? The first one is the transaction being split up. Now, we all know that the process of splitting up of transactions with the intent to launder money is called as smurfing, and smurfing is illegal according to law. But in the case of payment networks, as you can see, this 100 USD, which was basically split, in order to send it down to Bob and Trent. In payment networks, splitting of transactions is a very common issue, and there is no mechanism to verify whether these funds are illicit or not. So the second thing is bypassing the regulator. Now according to FinCEN and FATF, the two regulatory organizations which have laid out the AML guidelines, the threshold to conduct any sort of financial auditing or monitoring on a transaction is 1000 USD. Now these $200 they fall within the threshold of 1000 USD, and hence Alice can simply bypass the regulator. The third challenge here is the blacklist effect being propagated. Now since Charlie was involved in an illicit transaction with Bob, who in turn got the funds from Alice, then Charlie sends in 200 Canadian dollars to Dave. All of Dave's funds will also be tainted, and in this way the effect of blacklisting gets propagated also. Now, these payment networks have some issues with them, such as, like you need to constantly look out for better patch between sender and receiver, you need to pay routing fees, etc. In order to get around this, we have this idea of virtual channels. So this is how a virtual channel essentially looks like. Let's say you have Alice and Bob, and then you have this Ingrid, which is the intermediary between Alice and Bob that facilitates the financial exchange. A and B represent the payment channels between Alice and Bob. Now, this is the initial situation. Now, Ys of A, Ys of I, Z's of I, and Z's of B represent the collateral of each party in the respective payment channels. Now, when the virtual channel gets constructed, the situation looks something like this. Let's say Alice intends to send XA coins to Bob, and Bob intends to send XB coins to Alice. Now, XA coins get subtracted from the collateral of Alice, and XB coins get subtracted from the collateral of Ingrid in the payment channel between Ingrid and Alice. Now, if you come to the payment channel between Ingrid and Bob, XA coins get subtracted from the collateral of Ingrid, while XB coins get subtracted from the collateral of Bob. And this is how the money is transferred between Alice and Bob. Now, the problem here is this Ingrid in the middle, which is acting as a financial intermediary. It needs to register with FinCEN as a money service business because it is taking part in the financial exchange. Now, in the case of virtual virtual channels. There is no mechanism to enforce whether this is happening or not. Not only that, Ingrid can be a malicious entity. It can put in what do you call fraudulent coins, or it can put in laundered coins as collateral, and it can potentially cause Alice and Bob, both of them, to lose all of their funds. Now, coming to rebalancing, so let's say you have this network of users, Alice, Bob, and Charlie, Alice being the malicious one, and the numbers on the links represent the balance of each party in the link. Now, as you can see, Bob's balance in the link between Alice and Bob, and then Alice's balance in the link between Alice and Charlie's balance in the link between Bob and Charlie are zero. So that means they are skewed, and they can no longer take part in transactions. So in order to get around this, there was a technique called as rebalancing, which is proposed in the revised paper by Khalil et al. In 2017, and it was later on improvised by another paper in ICBC. So let's say after rebalancing, you have this situation wherein Alice has appropriated some of her funds to rebalance Bob's link, and then like Bob has reappropriated some of his funds to balance Charlie's link, and etc. So the issue here is that rebalancing can harm honest users. Now, since Alice is a malicious entity, when she tries to rebalance Bob's link by appropriating her funds, she ends up tainting all of Bob's funds. So in this way, even though Bob is an honest user, he ends up getting blacklisted and he ends up losing funds. And now, since Bob has used his funds to balance Charlie's link, Charlie will also end up getting tainted. And in this case, when Charlie intends to transfer $50 to Eve, since Charlie is tainted because of Bob, who got tainted because of Alice, all of Charlie's funds end up getting tainted. All of Eve's funds end up getting tainted as well. So in this way, the effect of rebalancing gets repeated. So what are the issues with respect to current AML guidelines? Now, we all know that AML guidelines have been laid out by the two regulatory organizations, FinCEN and FATF. So what are the issues with them? Now, the first one of them is the Courier rule, which states that the monitoring should be happening for transactions which are basically worth more than 1000 USD. Now let's say Alice is a malicious user, and then she tends to launder 1000 US dollars to Bob. She does so by splitting it up into two equal parts, 500 USD each, and make sure that the transaction falls within the threshold, and in that manner she can avoid this monitoring. The second thing is the cold wallet issue. Now, Alice and Bob are two dishonest people, and then Alice intends to launder $200 to Bob, and like she sends it, like she sends out these funds using cold wallets. Now, when the law enforcement agency tries to track this transaction, he simply gets back a response saying it's a cold wallet. The third thing is the issue with international cooperation. Let's say you have two countries, country A and country B. Alice, being a malicious user, is a resident of country A. Bob, being an honest user, is a resident of country B. And since country A and country B do not have any mutual agreement or treaty, they're not aware of each other's blacklist, right? So when Alice sent in 1500 US dollars to Bob, now this is above the threshold of 1000 US dollars laid out by FinCEN and FATF. So when the law enforcement agency intends to track this transaction down, he goes to country A and then asks if he can have some information on Alice. Now, since there is no treaty or agreement which facilitates information exchange, country A responds back by saying that like there is no treaty, and hence it cannot provide any information. Now, in this way, this transaction can simply evade the law enforcement agency, and then money laundering can happen. Now, the final issue is with the issues with the anti-money laundering program registration. Now, let's say you have Alice and a Bitcoin exchange. Alice sends in some USD in exchange for some Bitcoins. Now, according to FinCEN, any entity which takes part in financial exchange should be registering with the FinCEN as a money service business. Now, when the law enforcement agency goes to the Bitcoin exchange to see if it has registered with the MSB, and it also needs to have an approved AML program, the Bitcoin exchange responds back by saying that this Bitcoin exchange in general is decentralized. So hence there is no one to approve the AML program. So there were many instances wherein which these exchanges have contributed to money laundering. The details of these examples can be found in the paper. Coming to the experiments, we extracted data from the Ripple datasets from Jan 2019 to October 2019. Now, this has included over 4 million transactions among 153 different cryptocurrencies. Now, the aim of these experiments was to demonstrate the effect of the two blacklisting policies, Poison and Haircut, on the Ripple transaction dataset. Now, as it can be seen on the screen, even if one single transaction were to get blacklisted by Ripple, millions of dollars could get tainted. So our aim with this paper was to basically highlight the drawbacks and the loopholes that exist with the current anti-money laundering guidelines. And our hope is that in the coming future, this research will motivate scientists and researchers to come up with even more secure protocols. And at the same time, it will also motivate the law enforcement agencies to come up with more stringent anti-money laundering guidelines and mechanisms in the near future. Thank you.